And we are back. Welcome to my preview and predictions for the FA Cup quarterfinals in what could be the single biggest day/weekend in the history of the SO99 channel. As things stand, we are less than 100 subscribers away from 10,000, which would be a huge and amazing achievement for the channel. And as always, a massive thank you to all of you that are already subscribed. But a reminder to any of you that are watching for the first time or someone that's considered subscribing in the past that today could be the day that you become the person that takes us over 10,000 subscribers. But not only that, today is the day that we, for the first ever time, are doing our first La Liga preview and predictions. So that video has launched. It is already up and available on the channel. Members only. Don't forget to hit the join button at the bottom of your screen if you want to be able to watch the La Liga Game Week 29 preview and predictions video. As for today, though, we have got 4 FA Cup quarterfinals to talk about. And as things stand in terms of my FA Cup predictions, we are 39 out of 56 in terms of FA Cup results and 7 correct scores. I actually got 7 out of the 8 correct teams from the last 16 to get through to the quarterfinal stage. But bizarrely, the only prediction I got spot on was the only team that I got wrong. I got Manchester United, Fulham correct as 1-1, but I said Man United were going to win. Fulham ended up winning it, of course, on penalties. And that is exactly where we are going to start with today's video, with the winners of the match between Manchester United and Fulham taking on Crystal Palace. As we've just mentioned, Fulham got here beating Manchester United on penalties. Palace got here beating Championship side Millwall in that infamous game where Philippe Mateta almost lost his ear. But he, of course, is now looking to be ready and available for this game. In terms of the actual form of these two sides, it's actually more prevalent to focus on Crystal Palace first before we actually take a look at Fulham, because Crystal Palace are on an incredible run of form. They have won their last 4 matches in all competitions. They have 8 wins in their last 10 matches in all competitions. And the first of those 4 matches that they've won in a row came, you guessed it, at Craven Cottage away to Fulham in a 2-0 victory in the Premier League. From a Fulham perspective, since then, they won at Wolves, beat Manchester United on penalties, lost at Brighton, and then won against Spurs at home before the international break. Should be noted that Crystal Palace actually didn't play the weekend before the international break because their opponents were involved in the League Cup final, meaning this will be Crystal Palace's first game for over 3 weeks. So it's going to be interesting. In terms of the team news themselves, there are big news regarding key players for both sides coming into this. Firstly, Anthony Robinson, I think without any shadow of a doubt, Fulham's best player in the Premier League this season. He missed the international break due to quite literally an undisclosed injury. I have looked everywhere to see what was actually wrong with Anthony Robinson, but no one is saying what his injury is. So as things stand, we're going to have to wait for Marco Silva's press conference to see if he is going to be available. For Crystal Palace, of course, the talk is all about Jean-Philippe Mateta. Will he be available for this game? As things stand, he is declaring himself available for it. So I'm going to go off the assumption that he is going to play at least some part in this match. Final thing to say then is that both sides played their strongest available 11s in the last round. So now at the quarterfinal stage, it seems most likely that both teams will do the same. In terms of the head-to-head record, as we've already mentioned, Crystal Palace won the game 2-0 away in the Premier League. However, Fulham won the game at Crystal Palace earlier on this season 2-0 away as well. And the previous 3 meetings between these two sides before those respective 2-0 away wins were all draws. So really not a lot to split between these two sides. Personally, I think the most likely result is a draw once again. I personally don't have a clear favourite between these two. So I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. I'm going to be a little bit rogue. And I think that Crystal Palace are going to sneak the victory beyond normal time in this one. So that is my thoughts. Draw in 90 minutes. Crystal Palace to progress to the semi-finals. But could be a really tight one. Like I say, no clear favourites for me. Speaking of a head-to-head record, coming into the next game, which is Brighton taking on Nottingham Forest, I think everyone remembers what happened when these two sides met just a couple of months ago in the Premier League, with Nottingham Forest winning 7-0 in the Premier League over Brighton. But since then, the two sides have had a very different style of form. It's actually Brighton that have had the better of it. They have won 6 matches in a row, 7 unbeaten with their draw against Manchester City in their last game before the international break. But they were 6 wins in a row before that City game following the Nottingham Forest defeat, which of course includes the 2 FA Cup wins over Chelsea and then Newcastle at St James's Park in extra time in the last 16. And then, like I say, it eventually led to them drawing away at Manchester City before the international break. For Nottingham Forest, they actually failed to win any of their 5 matches following the 7-0 victory over Brighton, which did of course include their 2 FA Cup matches, which I know you're thinking, hang on a minute, you just said they didn't win any of their 5. They won both games on penalties against Exeter and against Ipswich, but to be fair to them, they have won their last 2 Premier League games, beating Manchester City and then beating Ipswich once again. In terms of the team news, it looks like Brighton don't have any fresh concerns, but their backline is still incredibly depleted. The likes of Lewis Dunk, Joel Veltman, Tariq Lamptey, Igor and Ferdi Kalioglu all look like they're still going to be missing and unavailable for this one. For Nottingham Forest, there is some huge news for them, which will not only affect this match, but could affect their top 4 chances in the Premier League, because Chris Wood has picked up a hip injury, which could see him miss up to a month with some massive Premier League games coming. Could be a huge loss for them, but obviously Awoniyi is ready to step in. In terms of players as well, they are going to have a few of their key players rested. The likes of Gibbs-White didn't play in the international break. Hudson-Odoi didn't play during the international break. But the likes of Milenkovic and Murillo were away playing some very competitive international matches. What I would say is that if I knew for a fact that this was going to be first team against first team, I would say it's more likely that this game is going to be incredibly close. However, Brighton have played their strongest available lineup in the last 2 rounds, whereas Forest have played a reserve team in their last 2 rounds, including when they played Ipswich, of course, in the last round. With a massive game against Manchester United on just Tuesday night for Forest, and of course they're in a massive race for Champions League places, I would expect Nuno to continue to rotate his side for this match, which in my opinion now makes Brighton the favourites to progress to the next round. So that is where I'm going to go for this one. I'm going to go for a Brighton victory, and I'm going to go for 2-1 to them. But that is with the air of caution that if Forest do play a stronger team, I definitely think it's much more likely they could get a draw or even the win. That then takes us to Sunday, where we have 2 more matches, and there is one Championship side left standing, and that is Preston North End, and they are going to be taking on Aston Villa. But it's not really been a great run of form for Preston over recent times. Yes, they did beat Burnley 3-0 in the last round, a result that I predicted Preston to get through despite how good Burnley had been playing, but I didn't think it'd be as heavy as 3-0. But surrounding that fixture, it's really not been that great for them. 4 draws, 2 defeats, but they did win their final game before the international break, which was at home to Portsmouth. Villa, on the other hand, come into this game on a really, really good run of form. 4 wins in a row, which does, of course, include that victory over Cardiff in the last round. And, of course, winning both legs of their Champions League matches against Bruges in then, of course, beating Brentford in the league. They did also not play before the internationals. We spoke about Crystal Palace not playing before the international break. Villa were another side not to play before the international break because their opponents were also in the League Cup final, which means that their players, for some part, have had a bit of a rest. Obviously, the likes of Rashford still went on international duty, but again, I do think that they're going to be a very, very strong side to deal with coming into this one. They played their full first team against Cardiff in the last round. I would expect them to be playing their full first team coming into this one as well. For Preston, it's really not looking good for them in terms of the team news either. They are definitely going to be without Potts through injury. There's a couple of other slight injury doubts. Greenwood is going to be suspended. He was sent off against Portsmouth. Ledson is going to be suspended. He picked up yellow cards in the last 2 rounds of this competition, so he is suspended through that route as well. And there's even a doubt over the incredibly controversial Osmajic up front. He looks like he's picked up an injury. That saw him miss the international break with Montenegro. So if he's missing as well, it's really not looking good for Preston. For Villa, they do have one slight doubt over Ollie Watkins because he missed England duty due to the slight knock, but the expectation is that he should be available for this game to play some part. To be honest, I can see this being a tough game for Villa. Preston are an incredibly physical side. They're going to want to make this difficult for them, but ultimately, with the amount of talent that Villa have got in their side, this really shouldn't be too much trouble for them in the end. I'm going for a 3-1 victory to Aston Villa. And then finally, the main event slot sees AFC Bournemouth taking on Manchester City, and neither of these sides are where they were coming in to the last round. If you remember, City were in the top 4, Bournemouth were occupying one of the European places, and since then, all of Aston Villa, Brighton and Fulham that we've spoken about in this video have gone above Bournemouth, because technically they've not won any of their last 5 matches, because the only victory they've had in their last 5 was their penalty shootout win over Wolves in the last round. For Manchester City, they beat Plymouth in the last round, but then lost to Forest and then drew at home to Brighton in a game that they probably should have lost. The weird thing is, when you talk about this fixture, especially when it comes to Bournemouth, is their poor run of form, certainly in terms of results, has actually coincided with some of their players coming back to full fitness. You think of the likes of Evan Nilsson, James Tavernier, that have made themselves back into the side. Since they've come back into it, they've not actually won matches, but should be noted that they absolutely should have been winning more matches. They absolutely should have beaten Spurs away from home. 2 absolutely goalkeeping howlers from Kepa, meaning that that game went away. And if you look at the actual stats in the game against Brentford, it's a real surprise that they did end up losing that one. For Manchester City, of course, this is their only real competition left that they're playing for. Yes, they would still love to get Champions League football. They're still in a position to get Champions League football. But for a side that wants to win trophies every single season, this is all they've got left. They're out of everything else. It's FA Cup or bust for Pep Guardiola this season. But so far in this competition, he has made wholesale changes to that starting lineup. And of course, it should be noted that the 2 goals against Plymouth were scored by Nico O'Reilly, with then the final goal being added late on. So we could see Pep rotate again. But I have a slight inkling that this is going to be the game where they decide they're actually going to go for it, because their Premier League game in midweek, with the greatest respect to Leicester, is at home to Leicester at the Etihad. This is by far a tougher fixture. So I think with a trophy on the line, Pep will finally start activating his strongest available side for this FA Cup game. Final thing to note is that Bournemouth did beat Manchester City at home earlier on this season. However, before that match, City had won their previous 15 matches in a row against Bournemouth in all competitions since Bournemouth got re-promoted to the Premier League. So City do have Bournemouth's number. They'll be hoping that, given the fact they beat City in the Premier League game, that might give them a little bit of an edge coming into this one. But I just still think City are going to end up edging it. It's going to be a really, really close one. I wouldn't say there's an outright clear favourite, but I'm going to go for Manchester City. I see it being high scoring, as most City and most Bournemouth games are recently. I'm going for a 3-2 win to Manchester City. And that will do it for these FA Cup predictions. As always, let me know all your thoughts down in the comments section below. Let me know anything you think I've missed. Don't forget to drop a like on this video if you have enjoyed it. Share it with a friend. And don't forget to head over to the membership side of this channel, where you can check out my first ever La Liga preview and predictions video. Thank you so much for watching as always. I'll be back with Premier League predictions again on Monday morning, so I'll see you there.